computer. Got it. Okay, so I wanted to welcome everyone this evening. This program, where we're going to be meeting with an author and is part of our 2022 diversity cultural programming. And we do have a couple of other items coming up that I wanted to make sure that you're all aware of. So I hope some of you were at our Bastille Day in July, but we also have an Indian Cultural Day coming up August 26th from 5:30 to 7:30. October 14th is the German Oktoberfest. November 4th from 5:30 to 7:30 is our Indigenous People celebration. So they are our cultural events. And in December, we're trying to line up music around the world as our cultural event. So there'll be some good things with food trucks and all that kind of thing happening at the library. But to get on with tonight's presentation, I'm really delighted to welcome Sarah. And you know, I'm really struggling with how to say your name. And I heard the way you said your first name was a little different than I pronounced it. So do you mind pronouncing your name correctly for the group? I have a daughter whose name is Sarah, S-A-R-A. So
yes, it's very common, and I know that some
for
people.
Me, so thank you.
That's all right. Yes, my name is Sarah El Sayed. So
Sarah El Sayed.
Yes, I know. Yes, Sarah El Sayed. So I know it's very common that I get Sarah. I'm not offended in any way if anyone calls me Sarah. I know it's very common, but yes, Sarah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. And I knew I was mispronouncing it, but you know, it's hard when the name's in your family and you say it a lot. So we welcome you to come to our book club. And I was hoping that we could start off with the evening with you talking a bit about yourself, why you wanted to write the book, what compelled you to do that, go on to the process of it, and then we can actually talk about the book and things that maybe you wanted the people to know that maybe didn't make it into the final edition. You know, maybe there was some parts that got cut or something that you'd like to talk about. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yes, sounds good. I'm more than happy to do that. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. For me, it's morning, but this is my very first sort of international event. So it's very, very exciting for me to hear all of your voices and to see all of your faces. It's really lovely to have this connection across the world. So I'm very blessed to have this. So yes, I wrote Muddy People, and it is a memoir. It's about my family. After we migrated from Alexandria in Egypt to Brisbane in Australia in the early 2000s. And what compelled me to write this book is that, well, actually I studied creative writing at university, and I graduated and I was working in a communications role, but I still wanted to pursue that creative writing. I was always compelled to write creatively, write stories. And even though I was interested in writing fiction, I always found myself being very, very inspired by my family and my experiences. And I found that the fictitious characters that I was writing were often just exact replicas of my parents or my grandmother. And so it was only natural that I would write a long form story that was based on my family. And so it became memoir because it is the truth. And I had submitted early on, a chapter to an anthology called Growing Up African in Australia, which is a series of Black Ink, which is my publisher in Australia. They have this series called the Growing Up series, where they publish a mix of established as well as emerging writers in these anthologies. The first one was Growing Up Asian in Australia, then it had Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia, Growing Up Queer, Growing Up Disabled in Australia, and this was Growing Up African in Australia. And so I saw the call out for submissions for Growing Up African in Australia. And, you know, being born in Egypt, so it's on the African continent, I thought, okay, maybe this is something that I could submit to. But then I also had this conflict of, well, you know, as an Egyptian, you know, we don't necessarily find ourselves being connected to that African identity. African is one thing and Egyptian is another. And so there's a lot of complexities within that thought itself. You know, it comes from the racism that is within Egypt, the compulsion for Arabs to try to strive towards whiteness rather than blackness or even brownness. So why is it that we don't consider ourselves African, and what is behind that thought? and also the feeling of me not necessarily feeling non-African either, or feeling that sense of other within Australia, within this like white dominant community. But because I was born in Africa, technically, I did write a chapter, and I tried to explore that feeling of not feeling connected to this place and not feeling necessarily connected to that one either. And I wrote a story about going to the African hairdresser here in Australia with my mother, because our hair we have like the kinky, frizzy hair that's from my mother's sort of Moroccan roots as well as Egyptian roots. And so we have like African hair. And so African hairdressers were the only ones that were able to do our hair. And I'd go there and I'd get my hair chemically straightened quite often. And so did my mother. And so I wrote a story about going there and then having to go to another hairdresser, a white hairdresser here in Brisbane, and how she sort of scolded me for getting my hair chemically straightened, and saying that it's not for my hair, it's for African people. And it's like, it's that sort of conflict of, well, I am African, even though I never said it before. I am African. It is for me. So that was that story. It was called African Mama. And I was lucky enough to have that chapter published in that Growing Up African anthology. And then from there, I went to the promotional events for that anthology along with the other authors. And at the first one that I did, the publisher was in the audience, and she asked me whether I was interested in writing an extended version of that story, essentially a story about my family in long form. And I thought she was joking at the beginning, because I was, I didn't necessarily think that someone would want me to write a whole book. But then she emailed me afterwards and followed up and said, where's your pitch? Where's your book? And so I put something together, and that's how this story came to be. It came to be because someone saw some potential in what I had initially written and gave me a chance to publish something in long form. And so I'm very, very grateful for that series, the Growing Up series, to give me that chance. And it did push me to really think deeply about my family and my experience, and reflect on these memories, and apply that creative nonfiction writing to memories, because memoir is memory but told as a story. Applying your creative writing techniques to memory. So I enjoyed the process. At times it was a little bit heavy for me, particularly in the more difficult parts of my family history. And it was sometimes a little bit, well, not a little bit, quite anxiety inducing when writing about my parents, particularly my father, because both my parents are still alive, and I didn't necessarily want to ruin my relationships with my parents. I wanted to maintain them, but I also wanted to be honest and truthful about what we had been through. But I wanted to prioritize my perspective, and that's how I sort of settled on that, how I talk to them about it. This is my perspective. This is how I experienced this. So yes, I don't know if I answered any of the questions that you posed, but I just kept talking. I hope that was somehow helpful.
I think you did a lot of those. So what was the hardest part of the book to write? You mentioned that some of it did, obviously, you're worried about your relationship with your family. Mm-hmm. What was the hardest thing?
I think there were a couple of difficult things. The first one that comes to mind is the moment when my parents have that argument about my father moving to Cairns, and then how he says that if he moves, they'll get a divorce, and he just wants me to know that that's, it's my fault. That if they divorce, it's my fault. And that was obviously at the time as a teenager very difficult to hear. But I didn't. What was difficult about writing that was bringing it up with my father and letting him know that I wanted to write that down, and this was going to be a part of the story, that I was going to, say that he said this. And I thought that when I brought it up to him, he would say, oh, no, I never said that. He would sort of
back down.
Yeah, he would reject what I was saying. But when I brought it up to him, I said, do you remember when we were having this conversation about, you moving, and everyone was very upset, and you said, and you pointed to me and you said, if we divorce, it's your fault. And he said, no, I remember. Yeah, I said that. And he didn't deny it, and he didn't even take it back. To be
Oh, gosh.
I think in that moment, and I think it's very characteristic of my father, that he believes everything that he says. And that's why when he read this book, that he was very happy with it. He wasn't upset by it, because I had presented him in the way that he is, in the way that he sees himself. And that's true with other characters as well, with my grandmother, with my mother, that I've tried to write them in the way that they have presented. And that's something that's been a little quirk of writing memoir that I've found and I've discovered, is that all of these anxieties that I've had of, oh no, I don't want them to feel upset by the way that I've presented. But no, in their minds, this is true, and this is how things should have been, and this is what they've said, and this is what they believe. So why would they be upset by that?
Yeah.
It was something that I didn't really consider that they would be fine. So that was a relief. But that would, I think coming to terms with that and having those difficult conversations with them would have been the trickiest part of writing this book.
Okay. What was your work schedule like? I mean, did you actually plan the book and say, hey, I'm going to write this after the short story? I'm going to, buckle down. I'm going to spend so many hours a day, and I'm going to work my way through this memoir and deal, or was it different than that? How do you?
Yeah, it was, when I pitched the work, I had to pitch it with a chapter breakdown. So I essentially wrote down what each chapter would be and gave a small summary of what each chapter would be. And so I worked from that, and I tried to write every day. I tried to write a stretch amount every day. And I mean, I had a deadline, so I had to,
Okay.
that really, really helped, because, and I'm not sure how it works in the States, but for creative, like nonfiction in Australia, is a little bit different when you're publishing as opposed to fiction. So with fiction, often publishers would want to see a full manuscript before they even consider engaging in that relationship with you as a writer. With nonfiction, it's often on the basis of that proposal and that pitch, and then you have that time to work on it. And it's different for each author as well, but that's sort of the standard of what we see. Fiction is sort of, we need to see the whole thing, where nonfiction is, give me the idea and let's work together on this. So that was where I was at. And so I had that deadline, but I also had the support of my publisher, and they're very well known for supporting debut writers. And so they came from that perspective of really understanding where I was coming from and my needs as a writer. And although I studied creative writing, this was my first time really having this prolonged interaction with a publisher. So that was really helpful. Essentially what happened in terms of my process, I worked, my publisher said, well, my editor said, okay, let's work on getting the first half by this date, like a halfway date. And so if there's any big issues, we can sort of catch them before you continue on the rest of the book. So I did that. So I was working on deadlines, trying to write every day to meet the halfway deadline, and then so on and so forth. So it was really quite an intense process, because I wrote the thing in about a year and a half, including the editorial time. So I did have to really, really put some hours away with making sure I complete it in time. Yeah.
And do you have another job that you're doing as you're writing, to
Yes.
help pay the bills till you get where you are now?
Yes. So at the time I was writing this work, I was in that communications role, but then I left it because I was doing my master's at the same time. And I did actually end up doing writing this book as part of my Master of Fine Arts. So it was getting a little bit too much to have that full-time work as well as studying and writing the book. So I left that job and I focused more on my studies as well as teaching at the university where I studied. So that was helpful. That was my job at the time. And then that's what I did to sustain myself, and then writing bits here and there freelance to help with that as well. But now writing my next work, I do have a full-time job. I work at the university in the marketing and communications team. Still the same university, still in the same environment. But yeah, so that is my sort of day job, and writing is on the side for now until I can work up enough content to sustain myself fully, which is the ultimate dream, I suppose.
Is that the goal in your life? You would like to become full-time?
I think so. It would be lovely. I don't know if I have enough. I mean, at the moment, I am struggling a little bit to get back into the writing process, and I'm not sure if that's because of my workload or because I'm still stuck in the mindset of Muddy People's come out and this promotional cycle is, I'm still going through it and I haven't really let it go mentally. So I don't know if I have the ability to sustain myself full time, even if I'd had the time and the means to. But it would be lovely. But I also do really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy working at the university and working with my students, and seeing them improve over time is really, really satisfying to me. And it helps me with my writing as well. It encourages me. When they write, I write along with them. And so that's really helpful for my practice too.
I have some more questions, but is there anybody that wanted to ask a question right now? Break it up from me a little bit. Could just, if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you. Go ahead, Sherry. You're okay. You're unmuted.
I was wondering how you decided to organize your book, because I thought it was really interesting for a memoir. You had sections where you were talking and you were thinking, and then you described what your mother was doing and what your father was doing. And that's different from what I've seen in other memoirs. And I wondered why that structure was so appealing to you. I thought it worked well. And I just wondered how you figured it out, how to do that, how to put that together.
That's a really good question. And honestly, to begin with, it wasn't structured that way. As I started to write it, I stuck to that strict, just one timeline chronological order of this is us migrating to Australia and then up to close to now. And that's how it was originally. But I thought, with my father's illness happening when I was a young adult, in my late teens, that happened at the end. But a lot of those reflections that he had when he had cancer were really important for me to include earlier in the book as well. And I didn't necessarily think, the event of him having cancer was, and I don't mean this in an insensitive way to him, and I know he understands it. It's in itself, in terms of for a story, because we've seen it so many times, like the story about cancer, it's not enough to be that ending, that tension holding event. It's a part of a lot of people's lives. And so just to have that at the end and say, oh no, and then he has cancer now, and then how he's reflecting and all that, there we go, at the end, that wasn't enough for me. And I found the most important part was his inner feelings through that process of being unwell and sick and potentially facing what he thought might, be his death. Those feelings and thoughts that he went through were really important and formed part of his character. And so I wanted to have them throughout the whole story rather than just at the end. So that was initially what drove me to have those Baba chapters. And then I thought, well, my mother also has her own story, even though she's not as expressive as my father. She's sort of the undercurrent of the family, and she's ever present. So I feel like she needed her time as well, which is why I chose to include her story. And the reason why I decided to maintain her story throughout as well was that her relationship with her father, upon reflection, really did form or inform my motivations as a person or as a character towards my own father. And what I mean by that is, with my mother being disowned by her father, that has always been a fact in our family. And it scared me to think about, well, what what am I eventually going to do to push my father to that point that he's going to do the same thing to me? And so I thought it was really important to include that part of my mother and her relationship, or lack thereof, with her father, to parallel my relationship with my own father. And I wanted to show my parents as they are, as fully fledged human beings, in all of their, they're both delightful people. I love them very much, but also they're both human and they have imperfections, and so do I. And I just wanted to be as honest and real as possible. So that helped bring all of their complexities and nuances out, to have those individual chapters throughout the story.
In America, we have an expression, we would call that, you would talk about them warts and all.
Yes.
So
Warts and all. Yes.
yes, that's our American
Exactly.
expression for that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Edie, if you wanted to ask a question or something, you need to unmute.
Okay, I got it. I
There you
got it.
go.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what Shari said. I didn't make out what she said. It didn't come across clear to Sarah.
I said, in America, we have the expression that she portrayed her parents with their warts and all.
I never heard that. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Oh, yes. Very, very, yeah. Okay.
Does anybody else have any particular questions? I want to make sure that I allow for those.
Yes, can I?
Go ahead, Trina.
Sarah, you said your parents are still alive, correct?
Yes.
And your father had cancer, but he's recovered very well, right?
Yes.
Are
Yes.
you
Yes.
are you in Brisbane?
Yes, I'm in Brisbane. Yes.
Okay, so you had very good care in Brisbane, correct?
Yes. So
Good hospital care. Okay,
he was actually living in the Northern Territory at the time when he was
Okay.
diagnosed, and he chose to fly down to the Gold Coast, which is just outside of Brisbane, but very close to where we live,
Oh.
to have treatment. And at first I had thought that it was because he thought that it was better to get treatment in Queensland rather than in the Northern Territory. But that wasn't necessarily the case. He just wanted to be closer to us. He wanted to be with our family as he was going through that. So yeah, but he did receive very good care.
that's nice. Good.
Yes.
It's winter where you are, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
you're wearing a sweater.
Yes, I'm very cold.
And we are sweltering here.
Oh
It's
God.
Very, very hot. in
Oh
the-
yes.
Yeah, 90s and no rain. So it's
Oh,
very
what-
dry.
Oh dear. Well,
Yeah.
we it's very sunny here. The Queensland winters are very beautiful. And I'm sure if you came here, this would not be cold at all. But for us, it's like high teens in Celsius or low 20s, and I'm just very cold.
Oh, that's, yeah, okay. You're too young to be cold. That's nice. I enjoyed your book. You had a lot of humor in it, which I really enjoyed. Okay,
Okay,
I mean,
good.
you laughed, one laughed through the book. But the one thing I came around with, you were very dedicated to your father, and the fact that he wanted you to marry a Muslim, and yet
Yes.
you, as a woman and a young girl, wanted somebody that you cared about, not specific. So what if he wasn't a Muslim? So how did you deal with that?
Yes, that was this is the major conflict of my life. That what for me growing up, obviously as a human being, living, breathing person, I had feelings towards boys and crushes at school, and all of my friends around me were having boyfriends and girlfriends, and I was just like, this can never happen for me. And so I just had to come to terms with the fact that I would never be able to fully love someone or be loved by someone in this country, because I wasn't prepared to just, marry someone for the sake of it because they're Muslim. I didn't want that. And so I mean, of course I had these friendships with people that I didn't necessarily talk to my parents about. But it was always, I was always so anxious of them finding out or being disappointed in me, and thinking that I was a bad person. But I still never wanted to do what they wanted me to do, and that just to marry a Muslim man. But when it came to talking to my father about that, again, I was very scared. I was very scared of what he would say. I always knew what the rule was, is that I had to marry a Muslim man. And that conversation that I had with him on the phone, because if you read the book, that as I was growing up, as I was in university, my father would sort of find suitors for me, and I don't know where he would find them, but he would just say like, "Oh, look at this boy! Why don't you be friends with him?" And I was like, "Where's this coming from? Since when is it okay to be friends with boys? And then now you're just giving me all these people." He did it quite a lot, and there was one point when I just had enough, and I just said, you have to know that I'm not going to marry someone that I don't know just because he's Muslim. I thought the bar was so low, like, you don't know anything about this person, but he's okay because he's a Muslim, and that doesn't fly with me. I'm not going to do that. And I said, chances are, and the chances are very high, that I'm going to marry someone that I already know. So there we go, I already know him, and he's not going to be Egyptian. He's not going to be an Arab. He's going to be my friend.
Okay.
And then he said, well, that's okay, but you know the rule, like, he has to be a Muslim. And I said, oh, I know that. And then he said, that's okay. And that conversation that I had with him was very emotional. It was like the first time I really expressed my feelings about that. So it was very difficult for me, but it was a relief that he at least was like, we had that first step of, okay, you're not going to marry someone who's Arab, you're going to marry someone who's your friend. And so he had the idea that I probably have someone in mind. But then I stuck to the rule, to be honest. I didn't marry someone who was not Muslim technically. So my husband now, Aaron, he was not Muslim. He's a white Australian, but he converted because he knew that it was important to my father, and ultimately it was important to me as well. That, I mean, my choices were either don't get married ever or marry a Muslim. Now, I don't think I was prepared to marry someone who wasn't a Muslim and sort of tear my family apart in that way. So I was very grateful that Aaron was understanding of that, and he did that for me, which was really lovely. And he and my father get along excellently. They love each other.
Wonderful. That's great.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. You made a great decision.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with what I wanted to do with this story in this book, is that, yes, I have all of these rules, but I very rarely break the rules, and I very rarely do I go outside of what my family expects me to do. Like, yes, maybe in the shadows sometimes, and I might have my small rebellions, but I think it's characteristic of many Muslim women, is that we acknowledge that we have these expectations that surround our family, and we do what makes us happy, but at the end of the day, what makes us happy is also to maintain the family unit, and that's what I try to do.
Good way to look at it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Phyllis, oh, go ahead, Rita.
I think, Rita, I'm not sure if I can hear you. It looks like you're off mute, but the microphone might not be
She's
on.
probably mute. She has to mute herself. I don't know.
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, I just dropped out again. Sorry, Rita. Can anyone else hear Rita? Is it just me or is it
No, I
okay.
can't hear her.
No.
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 Maybe she could put her question in the chat and we could read it.
Yeah, that's another idea.
Yes, well, she's getting her question ready. Is there a large Muslim community where you are? And are the Muslims all from like Egypt, or are there Muslims from different parts of the world? Because I know Muslims, like Jews, we're spread all over the world. So I think Muslims are too. So is your community a variety, or are you from one specific place?
Yes, that's another good question. So in Brisbane, when we migrated here, there were very, very few well, Muslims that we knew. There is a community here. In terms of Egyptian, very few. But from other countries and other parts of the world, definitely there are Muslims. In places like Sydney and Melbourne, the population of Egyptians and Muslims is much higher. So they have very established communities in those cities, whereas Brisbane is a little bit different. And when we came here, my father would go to the mosque and I would go with him sometimes. And so that's how he sort of started those connections. But we didn't necessarily as a family maintain them very well. I don't know why that was. I mean, my mother never went to the mosque, and it wasn't necessarily like a practice of hers beforehand anyway. I mean, like, she's a religious woman, but like privately, like, she has her own relationship with God and she chooses to do that in her own way. But my father, I think he was very determined to try and find people, and he still does, but not necessarily Egyptian. You know, the community is quite small. And then you'll find one, there's like a Facebook group that's like Egyptians in Brisbane. And sometimes people will post and say like, oh, you wanna, does anyone wanna meet up? And like the idea is there, but I don't know if I want to. It's just not part of our, I don't know, it's just not part of our family practice. And I think that's also impacted us as children. I always wondered like if my parents sent us to the Islamic school here, because there is an Islamic school in Brisbane. And quite a few people who do grow up in Muslim families do go to that school. How would that have changed my life? Would I have still had these same struggles and conflicts, or would it be different? And
Oh, interesting.
who knows? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. Huh. Okay.
I think it would have been easier if you'd gone to the Muslim school. Your friends would have been Muslim. You wouldn't have met your husband. You'd have met a Muslim suitor that your father would have liked. It would have been very, very different experience.
Exactly, it would have been very different. And I don't think I would have struggled with those expectations that my parents have on me, because I feel like everyone would have had similar or more.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that I didn't learn a lot from my experience of going to a, white Australian public school. I mean, I've grown to know a lot about myself and my limits, and it's built some character into me, so that's good enough. And it really helped me at least see the world beyond my family, going to those schools and seeing Australia and seeing the truth about the people that live here, and which is helpful in navigating the world beyond school as well.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, right.
Could I ask a question too?
Of course.
Did Aaron, you married Aaron, right? And he was your best friend growing up throughout school, right?
He was in my friendship circle. So I knew him. He went to the same primary school as I did, but we didn't really know each other then. But then in late high school, we became closer friends. Yes.
Right. And then it blossomed into more. I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
It is really lovely. It's lovely to have someone that I've known for a long time, and it was always a fear of mine that whoever I was with wouldn't accept my condition, essentially, that
Yeah,
they wouldn't accept
It's
that.
not a condition. It's you, and it's great. I think it's wonderful. And he converted to Islam.
Yes,
That's
he did.
wonderful.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
it's
it
my
was-
excuse me, it's my granddaughter. My husband's sick.
Oh,
She's calling to check. I'm
good.
sorry.
Oh, good.
Sarah, I have a question. This is Terry.
Hi, Terry.
Do you know why your family chose Australia to emigrate to?
good question.
Yes, there are two main reasons. The first is that they were considering either Australia or Canada, and my mother hates the cold, so she didn't. But my great auntie lives in Canada, so my grandmother, so Nana, her sister, lives in Vancouver. And she's lived there for a very, very, very long time. So that was always like an option that we would go there and we would join them. But that didn't happen. But my grandfather, so my mother's father, and Nana, when in the 70s, they had actually lived in Melbourne, and my grandfather worked here in Melbourne. And so my mother already had a memory of Australia when she was a child, and she was a citizen of Australia from
Okay.
that. So they became
Okay.
citizens. And so it was easy for us as her children to automatically become citizens of Australia because our mother was. And so that sort of took out another obstacle.
Yeah, it
in terms
eased
of
it a little
migration.
bit. Yeah.
Yes. And she always loved Australia. I think because she has those lovely memories of her childhood here in Melbourne, and so she always wanted to come back. So that was the reason why. And her migration back to Egypt from Australia was a little bit traumatic for her because so at that time my grandparents, their relationship was not going well, and my grandmother wanted to leave my grandfather, and so she sort of just took my mother and went back to Egypt. And when she got back to Egypt, she wrote a letter to my grandfather saying that she wanted a divorce. And so my mother was sort of just like pulled out of the place where she was, quite happy. And I think from then on, she's always wanted to go back. And she told me, I think I wrote this in the book. I haven't read my own book for so long, but when she was a child, she would, they lived on top of a travel agency. And she would always threaten my grandmother to say she's going to go downstairs and buy a ticket and go back to her father in Australia. So she's always had that want to come back here. And so I think it was just, it was a good option for her.
Yeah. Okay. I just find it, I give you so much credit for everything that you have gone through. And, like for me, and I guess most people, we're born in the United States and grow up here and don't have those trials, let's say, that you've had to go through. And it's just wonderful that how you've worked through everything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I mean, it was definitely an experience, and I sometimes forget that not everyone has that early migration experience that you
Right.
might have lived in the same place
Exactly.
your whole life. And but it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that it's been a terror. I've actually really, I've learned so much from living in this place, but also learning more about where I'm from as well. I really hold my culture and my family dear to me, and I think that as I get older, it's becoming more and more important to me that I identify with being Egyptian, identify with being Muslim, and like, while yes, I am Australian, that there is this other part of me that is so rich and full of story and full of meaning, and I want to explore that in every crevice of that through my work and through my writing. So and
That's
also,
wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
know what you are going through because I used to teach English as a second language, and it is the most rewarding thing to hear the stories of the children. Carol knows. She had a lot of ESL children too there. And it is the most rewarding thing to see them hold on to their language and hold on to their culture and adapt to ours too. And it's not an easy task.
yeah, oh, thank you. Yes, it's again, as I say, as I get older. I mean, when I was younger, particularly in my teens, I was trying my best to let it go and, you know, try to assimilate to Australian culture as much as I possibly could, because I didn't like being different. But I think it's this time in my life, as I've gotten married and we start to think about, well, what will our family in the future look like? I think that's
Yeah.
compelled me to think about, well, what is it that I hold dear and what's important to me, and how do I want to, if we're lucky enough to have children, to raise them. And yeah, so I want them to know about our history, and I want them to know about their culture as well. So yeah, it's important.
That's wonderful. You have a very rich heritage.
Nice.
So I have a question for you. Did writing energize you or exhaust you, or both?
both. At some points it was quite an effort, and in those moments I often did abandon the chapters if there was something that I was trying to push and it just wasn't working, or it was just too much stress to try and navigate that issue. I would often abandon it. But sometimes, and often, it was really invigorating. It was I didn't necessarily need to, I wasn't like, oh, I have to write again today. I was actually quite motivated in my writing. And I think it's because I grew to love, I love my parents and I love my family, but I grew to love them as their characters as well. Because I have to admit, yes, these are true tellings of my family members, but of course, in writing and creative writing, there are some parts that you have to leave out and some parts that you have to add in to create those fully formed characters on the page, so they make sense to a reader. So I really grew to love them on the page, and so I really wanted to keep telling their stories in that way. So that was a big motivating factor. So I really enjoyed the process of writing this book, even though there are some points that were a bit stressful, a little bit difficult to get through. And another thing that, if I go back to your very first question from the beginning of the session, difficult thing was the conflict between my grandmother and my father. I don't know if anyone
Yes.
sensed that.
Yes.
But my grandmother is also still alive, and she just lives up the road with my mother, so we see her every weekend. But my father and my grandmother do not get along in any sense of the word, and they're very, very different people, and I love them both. They're great. But I was also a bit concerned about how my father would react to the way that my grandmother reacts to him, if that makes sense. The way that I write about him through her eyes, or and that did come to fruition. Like when I was showing him the draft, when I completed the full draft of the work, and he was working through he did go through every single line and was looking at it. And then we had a discussion about what was in there and for what reason. And there was a line of dialogue in there from my grandmother where she says something about like on Muslim men or men, and she's like referring to him, and he said, oh, I don't think you should keep that in there because I don't want people to think that it's true of all Muslim men that they that they do this, or that it's sort of like a mean comment that she's making. And we sort of had to have the conversation with him about, well, this is something that she said, it's a piece of dialogue, and I'm not going to change it because this is from her character. This is what she said, and this is what informs her as a person on this page. So I hope that people don't, like, as readers don't think and take that what she said as being characteristic of all Muslim men or all Arabs, but I'm not prepared to change a part of her character
Yeah.
out of that fear.
She is who she is.
Yeah, she is who she is.
Yeah.
My
It wouldn't-
Jewish grandmother was the same way. My Jewish grandmother had opinions about.
Oh, they all
Yeah.
do. They all
Lot of
do.
stuff.
Grandmas, I think just grandmas. Grandmas have an opinion if they're Catholic, Jewish, Italian, whatever. I just took it as that was grandma's opinion, and you're like, okay, grandma, good going. Gee.
Exactly. And but I think I took it for granted that what we I mean, my parents are very educated people, but they're not necessarily big readers of literature. And I think in the world, as big readers, as a big reader, and I'm sure you all are big readers and even writers, that we sort of sometimes take for granted the world of literature and what that means and how we can craft story. And so when talking to my parents about these things, you sort of having to have those conversations of, well, this is a story. This is how I've crafted this story, and this is how I've told this story. And there are parts of story that, you might not agree with, and you might say, oh no, that's not how I saw it, or no, that's not how it happened. But this is how it happened through my perspective, and this is how I see it. So like having those, like, what is a story conversation also happened throughout the process as well.
Anybody have any more questions? Comments that you wanted to tell the author?
I'm sorry. I feel like I have so many questions. It's like so nice to sit down and have tea with you. For an Egyptian, you're very, very fair skinned, and you don't have.
Yeah.
When I was in Egypt, I saw many Egyptians who were much darker than you. So, but when you came to Australia, it sounded in the book that you were considered a dark person, a person, I guess in America we'd say of color. I'm not sure what the politically correct.
Yes.
I don't mean it to be negative, just
yes.
the differentiation. So how did you go from being a very fair Egyptian, considered kind of the fair people were the prettier ones, to a dark skinned, well, we don't want dark skin. How did you work through all of that? Because I don't agree with it, but it sounded from your book like it did happen. And it was a culture shock, I think.
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. And I do identify as a person of color because, coming as an Egyptian, I do have, so my grandmother's mother, so my great grandmother was English. So that,
Okay.
that's I think was an eighth of me is English white. But yeah, so like and my skin is quite pale now, but in summer I promise it's a little bit dark. You can see a little bit darker. But yes, no, in comparison to other Egyptians, I am considered fairer skinned. And you're right that in Egypt, and it's a fact that beauty is considered in terms of the proximity to whiteness. The whiter you are, the fairer you are. If you have blonde hair, blue eyes, like if you have, like my husband has green eyes. He has brown hair, but he has green eyes. But like my family always says, like if he goes back to Egypt, everyone's gonna be like, so beautiful, like that's the sort of thing that if like the fairer you are and the closer you are to white, that the more beautiful you are. there are some Egyptians that are even lighter skins, and if you look across other Arab countries, there are other communities that are even lighter and blonde hair and blue eyes as well. But coming here, it was very, very obvious that I wasn't white. At school, I was really one of very few who were not white, in terms of my look, my skin color, my hair even. So I stood out like a sore thumb everywhere. And not to mention that I seemed to go through puberty very early. And so I was always bigger than everyone else. Taller, and in terms of my body, it was just more developed through primary school, which made me very, very awkward and very uncomfortable. So couple that with the color of my skin and the texture of my hair. And when I was younger, I had an Egyptian accent. So that was all great to navigate through. But I won't lie that because I have that fairer skin, that yes, I in Egypt considered more, more desirable than people who have darker skin. And that's what goes back to what I was saying before about like that racism that is within Arab culture, that the want and the desire to be far away from Blackness. What does that mean for us as, we consider ourselves people of color, but why do we shy away from that connectedness to African continent and Blackness? That's something that we have to acknowledge within our own communities and work through that own, like the entrenched racism within our own Arab community. It's important.
Can I say something too? That when you came to your new country, you came at a very difficult age. Puberty is difficult anyway. So to have to go through this new experience at that time of your life, I think was harder than if maybe you had been a little older or maybe even a little bit younger. And I'm just saying that, but I don't think your culture is the only culture that associates lightness of skin with I'm not sure what, because I, for one, find any dark skin, I've seen beautiful, beautiful dark skinned people. I've seen, and I think it's something that all cultures have to get used to and to get past. Hopefully we can. And I think it's very interesting to learn about new cultures. And I love your grandmother. Every family should have a grandmother like that. Because I'm sure in her mind, you can do no wrong.
It's funny that the feedback that I've gotten the most is that, oh, I love Nana. She's our favorite character. So she's very happy about the fact that she's the star and everyone loves her.
You're talking about your family. Is your family all pretty much supportive of your writing and of writing in particular a memoir, because that is?
Yes.
Has anyone kind of protested or put up any roadblocks, or that you had to work around them a bit?
I won't lie that there are things that I didn't include because I thought that they might not be fair on my family members. And as I say, I tried to be as honest as possible, but there are some things that I just couldn't justify. Like there was no reason for me to include that. It might just be too harmful for them. And so there are some things about my father that I chose not to include. And that was from me. That wasn't from him or pressure from him. I just chose not to. In terms of like roadblock or feedback, it's funny that I wasn't expecting this, but when my mother read it, she actually was, she said that I should have been more harsh about my father, that I should have been a bit more, told a little bit more about him. I mean, obviously they don't get along, but she thought that there was a lot more that I could have included that I didn't. And I mean, I had my reasons for doing that. I had my I still have to maintain a relationship with him. I don't hate him. I don't want to just burn that, that connection. So that was really the only thing that came as a roadblock. Oh, there are some moments that where my sister might have done something where I showed her the chapter and she said, "Oh, I don't want people thinking that I did that. Can you just say that you did that instead?" And so I said, "No, I didn't." I think it's the one where she's where I say like I'm stealing my brother's girlfriend when she's coming over, and I like starts I like take the clothes and like steal them from her and hide them from her. That was my sister, and she didn't want me to say that it was her. But little things like that, but there wasn't anything huge that I hadn't already myself made the decision to not include.
I find that interesting because writing a memoir, when all of the people involved are still there and can read it, becomes sensitive. And when you want to keep all your family connections and you tell the truth and yet not hurt anyone's feelings, that is a real narrow path to transverse, It
is. It was really difficult. Yes, it was, and it was very stressful. But at the end, like I said, I didn't expect that. The way that you write people is the way that you see them and the way that they presented. So it's not like it's not like they're not aware of how they are. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't think about that before. Like, this is how everything that my father said, he said. And he did. So, and he, in his mind, he sees that as like, yeah, that's right. Good. You got it. Yeah. So if like my grandma, for example, when she read that, she would laugh and say, "Oh, how silly is he? Like, how idiotic does he come across? This is so funny. Like, look at him." And that's from her perspective. Whereas from his perspective, he's like, "Yep, great, accurate." So, and it goes both ways as well. Like, he might read her, and then other people might read other people and have different perceptions as opposed to the person themselves. So that was really interesting. It worked in my favor. So.
Feel calm.
Do you read any of the book reviews that are published, good or bad? And what have you thought about now, first-time author? I know one of our people, Mike, wrote a review. I don't know if you read it. He posted that online. He couldn't be here tonight, but he posted his thoughts and did a really nice review, and I can send that to you if you didn't see it.
Please. Yes, please. I would love to read it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I read every review that I see. So no, I have loved that part of the book as well. Seeing what other people how other people interpret the work. And it's really, really interesting because looking at reviews from people in Australia, it's so fascinating to me what reviewers choose to focus on, and every review is different. And I think that goes to how we reflect on memoir and real story is, when you have a reader read, they're going to connect to a different part, and everyone connects to a different part. And that's been so satisfying to me, whether they really love it and they're raving about it, or whether they have some questions about it. It's the biggest, like, it's so satisfying to see readers read this book deeply and connect in different ways, and that's really what's made publishing this work so worth it, is seeing those readers' perspectives. Like, for example, like I'll have someone who reads the book who's an Arab Muslim woman who lives in Sydney, for example, and she'll say, well, I enjoyed it, but I didn't necessarily feel like I related to some of the experiences. And hey, that's fine. That's great that you acknowledge that, because you live in a different place than I do. As I mentioned, our communities are so different. The Arab community is so much stronger in Sydney, but this book is distinct to my experience and the place that I'm living in too. So yeah, I love all reviews, so please send them all my way.
I will send you some. How do you deal with, and I don't know if you had any, but bad reviews? Someday you will if you haven't yet.
The only, I mean, it's funny, I haven't seen one that's been totally terrible. I have looked on Goodreads and there are some comments that are like, I know the advice always that we always got through uni is like, never go on Goodreads, never read the Goodreads reviews. But I have. And I think there was one that's like, oh, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's like, it could have gone a little bit deeper, like, oh, it's sort of like on the surface, but it could have gone a bit deeper. And that's the sort of extent of it, you know, the negativity is that they wanted more, which is fine. That's great. I'm
Well,
glad
that's good.
people
It
want
meant they
more.
were intrigued, right? You can look at everything positively.
Yeah. But no, I take all criticism, and it's just really interesting to me to read other people's perspectives. So yeah.
What is the best thing that's come out of this whole process for you?
That's a good question. I never really thought about that. Well, number one is having my work out there and for people to be able to read it and to connect with it, or not connect with it, but at least read it deeply, which has been really lovely. But also to be able to establish myself as a writer in this community in Australia. And I know I said that the community is smaller in Brisbane, but what publishing this book has really opened me up to is that the Arab Australian literary community, and they come from Melbourne, Sydney, Western Australia, South Australia, writers that are all across this country that relate to or connected to the Arab identity in some way. And I really feel like I've become part of that community. And it's been so lovely because they're so supportive, and we're all so supportive of each other. And some of them are much more established than I am. But I feel like we're all bringing each other up because we understand the importance of telling these stories and really carving that space for ourselves in this literary community in Australia, the wider one. So that's been really great. And I feel really blessed to be part of that too. And of course, doing things like this, being able to see readers, and as I said, this is so special to me to be able to connect with you from across the world. It really means so much to me. So
And should you ever want to come to the US, you could have a good place to visit. We'd all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to visit soon. So I hope that's on the cards in the future. But it's so lovely to see all of your faces. It's my heart is so warm right now. So thank you so much for coming.
And I do want to say that, you know, we said this is about the time. If anyone has a burning last question that you want to get in, because I don't want to.
No, when Jane said that the author is going to come to us from Australia, I said, oh, great, maybe we can do a road trip.
Yeah, maybe we'll come to you.
That didn't go over.
This has been absolutely marvelous. You are a delight.
Yes, she is.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sarah, I really enjoyed your book, and no pressure, but wonder about the next book.
Yeah, that was my question.
I'm working on it.
You asked my question.
Yes, I'm working on it, definitely. The next book is more inspired. It's fiction, like biographical fiction, more inspired by my grandmother's life. So you'll get to hear more about her in the future.
When is
Make
it?
sure
Do you have a
we know when
title?
that happens so that we can be on
Yeah.
top of it.
Let us know so we could all do it.
Will do.
Anyone have any final thoughts or questions before we you know, I really do appreciate, again, you're taking the time. Oh, go ahead, Anne.
Can we take a picture, you know, with holding up our books and her?
Oh,
in the
yeah.
picture?
Oh, that's so
Great.
sweet.
I
Great.
have it on my Kindle. I have it on
Oh, all
my-
right.
How about
on
that?
my
That's
Oh,
phone.
look at the book.
Wait. I'll get it on
Let
my
me get
Oh,
mine.
how beautiful.
That's a good idea. So she could see what we have read.
Wait.
I'm gonna take a picture as well.
Wait. I gotta go to the
What
phone.
did you think about the cover, Sarah?
Oh, I really love the cover.
Did
It's
you?
so bright.
Okay.
The only conditions I gave to my publisher when they said, you know, do you have an idea about what you want? I just said, I don't want a photo of myself and I don't want it to be brown. And then they got
Okay.
away and made it so bright. So that's great. I love it.
Great.
It's on my Kindle.
Oh,
Oh, you took it already? Oh. Did you take it already?
Yes.
we took the
Oh, all
photo.
right, I missed it.
Anybody who got a really good shot, send it to me. So I'll make sure that we get a shot. I'd like to put it on our website too.
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay, well, I want to thank you again for joining us. It's really been a delight to have you here. I hope that you'll stay in touch with our group. We enjoyed having the chance to explore a culture with you, and it's been a great month of reading plus a good discussion tonight. So thank you for that.
Oh, and thank you so much. This has been absolutely brilliant. I'm so pleased that you enjoyed the book and you had some excellent questions. So lovely discussion. Thank you so much.
It was,
Thank
a,
you.
it was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
meeting you. A
Oh,
pleasure.
you too.
Yeah.
Okay, and if the book club wants to